Welcome jury panel, welcome audience, welcome to the live jury session of the Frame Awards. And today we will announce the winners of the month March. Let us see if we can take you through a presentation. Okay, so we'll do an introduction, then speak about the honorable mentions of last month of March. A couple projects that stood out according to the jury. And of course, we will speak about the winner of the month, the interior of the month. The jury has also been asked to look at trends, prevailing trends, overarching all of the 80 or so submissions that they had a look at last month. And there will be room for questions. So let's move on to the next slide. This is March's jury panel. This was March's jury panel. And I'm happy to say that 4 of them are here with me today in this meeting. Let's have a look at who they are. It's Cairo London, the creative director and co-founder of Arc Club based in London. Hi, Cairo.
Hello.
Amrita Mahendru, the founder and director of Drew Da Costa Mahendru Architects based in London, Paris, and Melbourne, if I'm right. Hi, Amrita.
Hi.
Then Nassim Kurting, the head of design at the Office Group, also based in London. Hi, Nassim.
Hi, guys.
And Sergio Manino, founder of his namesake studio in New York City, in another time zone. Welcome, Sergio. Thanks for being with us. First of all, you have looked at some 80-odd projects last month across sectors, across categories, from co-living complexes to shop windows to hotels and bars and workplaces. What's your general impression? What stood out? What resonated with you? Amrita, could you make a start?
Sure. I think there are a couple of things which really, firstly, I think one of the most strong things that I experienced, and this is much more on a personal level, is that, you know, it was a pleasure to see this life that we haven't been living for for almost a year, well, more than a year now, which it was strange. It was, you know, we were looking at interior entries for bars, for restaurants, for office spaces, and they were full of people and life, and it felt almost, you know, it felt like another time. At the same time, there was a sense of hope that we're going to return to many of these things, hopefully soon. And I think that really, it had a huge impact on me to be able to see these entries, which were coming from all over the world. From many of these projects must have been photographed prior to the pandemic sort of rolling out throughout, and were completed probably in 2019 or towards the end of 2019. And so there was a real realization that there's a difference in the world that we're living in today. And I think there was an inevitability that I was looking at them through a lens from today. And that was both good, and sometimes also it tended to sort of change the way I viewed them. So if I felt that something was, many of them, there was an immense sense of life, an immense sense of hope, and really strong, powerful projects which were coming from all over the world. And I think that was really interesting to see how much, you know, the creativity and how many exciting projects are taking place everywhere, because the entries came from just about every corner of the world. I think, I think one of the things that was probably most impactful for me was this feeling of the changed lens through which we're looking at projects. And so when it felt that projects were considered and there was this real sense of congruity between the intent and what the project was designed for, and the way material was used to meet that intent, and to kind of achieve its objectives. Those were probably the most successful, where it felt that maybe too much material was used to kind of carry out the same design intent. It that's where I tended to find myself thinking, well, maybe this just isn't right for the world we're living in anymore. Especially today when we've spent a year thinking about how we consume, how we live, how we work, how we, there's been a whole series of globally we're realizing, do we need as much as we had? And so I think I looked at a lot of these projects with a sense of maybe frugality from where I was sitting, at least. So it does make you think hard about how we've changed and how we might revisit these projects again or design in the way that we might in the coming years.
You almost sound sad.
No, I mean, it's actually, I think it's yeah, I mean, I think it was a little because it felt it's like such a different world. But I know, I think it's actually a good thing. I think we're going to really think about this differently. And I think we'll also, I mean, this will come up once the winners are announced shortly, and it'll come up a lot because I think there's great hope in what we can do. I just hope we do it wisely in a way. And that's not something to be sad about. I think it's something to be actually very happy or proud about, because we will think about our resources differently. And I think that matters a lot, especially with interiors, because we can, it often feels like we have to do more to achieve the end goal. And I don't think that's always necessarily the case.
Thank you, Armita. That resonates with me, what you just said. Cairo and Nassim, you're both in workplace design. And that's the one area that has been and will be disrupted heavily by the virus. How do you see your own job change over the course of, well, the next year, so to say, post-pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about it probably every day. And the way I've framed it in my mind is that the workplaces moving forward need to be extremely compelling. People no longer have to come into the office. So if they do, it needs to be for a great reason. So the office spaces, I feel like it's so much up to design and the design world to push what the office is and what the office can provide. In order to bring people back, but not for the sake of just bringing them back, but bringing people back for meaningful interactions with their colleagues and with their work. So yeah, I think it's the role of designers around the world to really give people hope and give them a really compelling reason to come back. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
And Cairo, looking at the workplaces that came by over the course of the last month, there were a couple there, I think.
Yeah.
How do you think they will need to be redesigned, these workplaces?
Some of them, I would say quite a lot. I mean, the way that we've been speaking about work for the last year has changed so incredibly, like it's like a different world we're waking up to, which has been incredibly exciting to work in that world. And I guess also for us, I mean, I'm just, because we're the flex working alternative. So for us, that's been, it's been sort of a happy coincidence, I guess, in one way. But I do think, the discussion before has been a lot about big breakout spaces, places where people interact, and how the office should be, smart and extremely expensive, and it's very quite big as well. And all of a sudden we sort of like changed and going in the complete opposite direction. It has to be like extremely agile. You might only use it once or twice a week. And if you're doing so, if you're like a company, for instance, you might have to try and get your employees only in for FaceTime, and maybe you as a company would then have to attract people by offering something else, maybe almost look at hospitality industry rather than the sort of the office industry. And perhaps if you're a co-working sort of company, you have to start and look much at offering your members a much more of a flexible sort of membership, with the sort of the bigger people out there. It's always been, you sign up for a year or two. That's not going to happen anymore. And I think some of the offices that we saw now here are very flexible, but there's also quite sort of fixed seating arrangements, and if the pandemic is here to stay or, come back yearly. We do have to adapt it and be sort of a lot less, I guess, rigorous in the way that we design our workplaces. I'm not sure if that makes sense. But...
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Cairo. Well, for the audience, both Cairo and Nassim are working for co-working entities. So you design co-working spaces basically, and you run them, which is something else, of course, than the hub office, the offices that banking companies or insurance companies or whatever companies occupy. So that's a totally different line of business. Sergio, you are, I think, working predominantly in retail, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Yes. So what kind of change do you see coming there?
Drastic, completely. Everything needs to be reinvented from scratch. Even from the name. The name store implies that you are storing merchandise in an environment and for people to come and buy, but that's no longer the case because people buy in many different ways. And I think that what we realize is that the store is no longer a place to sell merchandise, but it's a place where people interact with the brand. So you have to completely rethink the way you design it. And people talk about experiences, they talk about multi-channel. What it means really is that people still like to go out, to walk around, to wander into a space that they've never seen and try a jacket or something that they've never seen before. But it's not necessarily the old way of buying it that will remain. So you can see something on Instagram, maybe then you look up the company, you go on the website, then you go on a pop-up, then maybe you go back home, maybe you place the order at 3 a.m. Somewhere else, you don't know. So retail is completely changed and the way we design the store needs to reflect that. But the most important thing is that I think what's crucial, what's going to be very important in the next few years, is what brands represent. So the interaction between the people and the brand is a place where the brand has the ability to show what their values are. And I see that like the values becoming probably the most important aspect, much more important than the shirt or the sneaker itself. If the sneaker has some sort of like background that you relate to, so the people that are making it are paid well, they're treated fairly, everyone is treated fairly, then of course you're going to buy them. But if you know that the background of the company, and I don't want to make names, I don't want to say names, but if the background of the company has some social issues, they're not treating employees correctly and so on, then I think that will affect in the next few years the way people relate with the brand.
That's a nice bridge to the next chapter of this session. We're going to have a look at the winners of the honorable mentions. So the first winners of this month, so to say. And the first honorable mention is for Arcadia. That is a co-living complex designed by Breathe Architecture, DKO and Oculus. It's in Alexandria, New South Wales. I think that's basically Sydney in Australia. And it actually won 2 honorable mentions, one for the best use of material and one for co-living complex. So let's talk a little bit about this complex that is supposed to be fossil fuel free. So it's no gas, only electricity there. There's a lot of communal spaces there, rooftop gardens, lift lobbies, other communal spaces. And talking about the best use of material, it's made with recycled brick. First question for Cairo. The designers write about this project. At its heart, Arcadia is about ecological sustainability and social sustainability. Do you agree?
Yes, I do actually. This was one of my favorite projects, so I'm very happy that it has honorable mention in both these categories actually. Because what they described was also how there are obviously 4 different communities, 4 buildings, and there's I think 152 homes, and how they sort of wrap this brick skin around to create this one surface, and how they then bring together the people to this communal rooftop. So I thought it was a very, sustainability wise, like it's sort of this dual, this dual notion about it, I think really resonates with me. I think it works from the look of it. Like I believe there wasn't any drawings in this one, unfortunately, which I would have loved to see to sort of understand better how these bodies work together. But the photos describe it really quite well. These sort of like underbelly that you're showing now, I thought was really intriguing, and I can only assume that it works really quite well for the residents to sort of, it's like a cooler place, because I believe it's probably quite hot there in the summer. And also, I mean, I guess like to recycle bricks is a sustainable way, but I believe it could also be quite expensive, perhaps. But that was just sort of like a question that I had, really. But other than that, I think this is a wonderful project. I like the sort of like nod to the history as well. So in the same way as it's sort of sustainable with the bricks, they're also obviously they did this research of the site, I think, and it was an old working class community, where they had used bricks previously. So I guess that's also a way of seeing it in a sustainable way, to sort of like reuse the old history.
Thank you. Amrita, what makes for a great co-living complex?
I think actually Cairo just hit the nail perfectly on the head. This is, well, I mean, I think, well, a co-living usually constitutes that you have some shared communal areas. So you live in your own apartment, you tend to have your own kitchen, bathroom, and your core needs, but then you also have these shared communal areas where you can interact with other people who live within the same complex. So I think the more attention that's given to those shared areas, such as the public areas which were shown earlier, and the shared rooftop gardens, and the common amenities are what constitute, what raise the bar of co-living and make it something above and beyond just simple housing, just a generally large housing complex. And I think what's really interesting is that this project is, the apartment interiors are quite simple. I don't, there's nothing revolutionary about the simple finishes and doing a really nice kitchen that's a bespoke detail, and then keeping everything else quite neutral and simple. I think what's really special about this project, which is well beyond the interiors that we're discussing, is actually the fact that so much attention has been given to common spaces, which would otherwise be in a normal housing project, which would be considered an excess that developers can't usually afford. So I think the fact that they've tipped this on their head and said, okay, the interiors need to mean something, which is fine, but the common areas have to be dramatic and something where communities can really come together and co-live effectively, is really quite remarkable, because it's hard for a developer to be able to do that. A space like that nave that they have created, which is monumental in its scale, its size, it actually means a lot for a developer to reach out to that extent and make an effort for the community of the development to that point. The other thing that I find really interesting on the material front, because I know that they're also shortlisted were honorable mention for the best use of material, is that 152 apartments is big. This is a big building complex, and as Cara mentioned, it's all connected together through this singular material. Getting enough recycled bricks of a uniform character to do that is next to impossible. So I think it's actually really interesting. And if you look closely at some of the photographs, you can see that there's a lot of variation in the material, but the way they've detailed it, you can actually see here in this picture, you can see red and yellow and clinker bricks, and some of them are chipped. And I think taking a material that has that much character and is so varied at an individual scale, but they've used it right across the development to create that sense of uniformity and a singularity of the building is really impressive, because it's very hard to get that much of one thing to get it to look so consistent. So I think that there is a very considered use of the material and a considered celebration of what you can do by recycling or happening upon a certain amount of individual difference. So you can see here there's so many different colors and varieties of brick, and I think that the project really celebrates that rather than hides from it or tries to unify it.
Right, thank you, Amrita.
If I can add one comment, I think the texture of the bricks is what makes the project very interesting.
Yeah.
The fact that all these elements are different in colors, but they made sure that they were spread out properly throughout the entire facade to create an interesting texture.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was very impressed by that.
Yeah.
And the brick is not only visible from the outside and on the outside, but also inside.
Yes.
You can see that here. So the brick is central to this project, the recycled brick. And Nassim, you commented in the jury comment box, I read that, on the fact that the building's aesthetics are not compromised by the fact that it's sustainable. So is that usually at odds still, sustainability and pleasing aesthetics? Is that still the case?
I do love design that sees it as the same thing. So where a sustainable building means that the design isn't compromised, because designing a lasting space means designing sustainably. So what I mean by that is not being trendy, for example, and this building was not trendy. There's not really trends to be seen there. So that's why I feel it's going to last. So it's not only sustainable because of the bricks, it's also sustainable because it's beautiful. Yeah, it's really lovely. And also, on a side note, I'm Australian, and that's my home city. So I was really excited to come across this building. Like, another amazing thing that I just loved about it was the fact that it sits perfectly in its surroundings. When I was judging, I liked to look at the photos before I read the description. I don't know if that's allowed, but I just like to kind of immerse myself and almost guess what the project was. And for me, I just looked at it and it felt Australian. And I feel like that's a real testament to the project, because to sit in your environment and just be one with the environment is so important. And the use of the bricks, the timber, the brightness, the portals. Yeah.
Yeah, it was certainly not Swedish. Like, that would not work in Sweden. That sort of wonderful gate at the bottom would be awful and cold and windy, and the garden at the top would be, full of rain and snow. So yeah, it definitely.
Yeah.
Sergio, you're based in New York, but born in Italy.
Yes.
Would this work in either countries, so in the States and in Italy?
I think it could work totally in both countries, yes. But I see definitely in Italy the reuse of old materials. It's typical of the Italian culture, European in general. I think that in European design architecture, it's rooted in the past. Like, we have our foot on the ground and we know that the past is very important, which sometimes is also limiting. In the US is the opposite, and it's always the future. That's the only thing we're looking to. But I think this project sits in between because it has elements of both. That makes it very interesting. But going to the use of bricks, like we said before, I think, and this is something that we're exploring in the studio as well, like thinking, because tackling climate change is a very, very difficult task. So what if we use Lego blocks in a way? So we build our buildings thinking that it's a Lego block. a Lego piece can last a lifetime or more. So these bricks or other materials maybe could have many different lives. So you use it in a way that maybe it's mechanically attached to one another. There is something, there's no glue. And I saw these trends in some of the projects, and people are trying to explore that so that when the life of the building ends, the materials take on another task.
Okay, Sergio, stay with me for a moment. We're going to have a look at the next honorable mention. And that is for JA Studio for a window display in San Sebastian in Spain for a fashion brand called L'Oreal Mendian. I don't know if the pronouncing is any good. Actually two honorable mentions, one for window display and the other for the best use of color. And Sergio, you've been talking about retail and how it needs to change. Now we were just talking about sustainability. This is supposed to be a sustainable approach to retail because all of the used elements here can be recycled or are already recycled. What can you say about the sustainability of this approach to making a window display?
And that's exactly what I was mentioning before. A window display only lasts a few weeks or maybe a couple of months. So we have to think a way to reuse these materials somewhere else. And I think the way they did it, it's an interesting attempt. I don't know if it's going to work in reality in general, not the specific projects, but the fact that people are trying hard to attack the problem, that's I think that's laudable.
And Cairo, can you explain the simple but really bold concept behind this design?
Yes, well, I can try. I think what was quite striking with this one, and if I understood it correctly, is that they are the designer are sort of talking about three elements, and that is earth, water, and light, and how they are representing these elements through the colors and the materials in this picture. So they're actually just using one focal plane for the three colors. So the perforated blue metal sheet that we see on the left is then sort of symbolizing this dripping driplets of rain that is falling on this raincoat, because it's actually the raincoat that is in the that they're framing. That is the product. I think that the fashion brand actually has other things, but for this particular window, it was only the raincoat that is in the, for us to look at. So they're only using these three colors. It's green, yellow, and blue. And then they're just framing these three different coats within the perforated metal sheet. And I think like without actually stealing the show, because naturally if you're using these sort of bold block colors, you could totally miss the actual product, which I think happens quite often when people, get carried away designing window displays. This is actually a really clever way. And by also keeping the rest of the store white, the floor, the ceiling, the lights, like everything is just rendered white. The coat actually really stands out. And I think that they managed, because there's these two windows as well, they managed to really to frame both these three colors on the left-hand side, but then also the three coats that are hanging in the right-hand window. I think it's really quite clever and very striking without stealing, as I said, the sort of the focus.
Amrita, most window displays, they block the views into the store. This one doesn't.
No.
It opens the view into the store. Is that commendable? Is that something that you would like to see more often in retail?
Yes, definitely. I think what's well, this project actually, I think I was so pleased to see that this one really came up as an honorable mention. I think what was really intelligent, this project embodies everything that I said earlier about frugality of material use, like using as little material as possible to achieve the greatest amount of, or the greatest effect, you know, to give it, to really communicate everything or synthesize the idea of what you're actually trying to communicate, what you're trying to sell with the least material gesture, and especially since these materials can likely be recycled or used or are already recycled. I think what's really clever is that they tilted the axis of the view. So from the window, rather than looking at a display that is standing frontally to the street, they've actually created an angular perspective through the shop. So as you approach it from one side of the street or another, you're actually going to be always looking at that surface on an angle. And that angle with the yellow means that no matter what happens, you're actually always going to get a yellow reflection onto the blue. So it's actually, I mean, it's an optical trick, but a very clever one, because it helps kind of create this illusion of rain, basically, which is, I think, what they're trying to communicate, all the droplets, which would not be perceivable if it was fully vertical or if it was just frontal to the screen. And I think what it also does is, what I found really intelligent also, is that it drives your eye into the space of the shop. So even though you're looking at 3 coats from where you're standing, if you go back to the photo just prior, maybe one before, here you immediately see the rest of the store as well, and you get that little connection to the rest of the store. And I think that's really, it's really quite a unique way of treating the space. Also the yellow frames, the text, the shop front, like the shop's name at the bottom as well, without interrupting the view. The raincoats listed at the top. I think everything's very considered and very drawn out with the least material gesture, which I think is a really considered, well-detailed, and intelligent way to design, because it pushes the envelope. It means if you design smarter, you maybe don't need to do as much materially, I mean. And I think that's really very commendable and exciting. It's very unique. It's not a window display we typically see.
Thank you, Amrita. Nassim, last question for you. You live in London, don't you?
Yes. Yeah.
So you must be very familiar with Regent Street, Oxford Street, that kind of typical high streets in metropolitan areas. Yeah. Could you see this bold but very abstract approach to window displays work in that kind of street? I mean, normally post-pandemic, when the traffic's back in again.
Yeah, I could definitely see it there, but I haven't seen it there. That's the thing.
Exactly.
I think, yeah, a lot of the London retail stores that I've walked past recently, just so extra. There's just so much there to see. They're trying to communicate so many messages at once, whereas this is just so poetic and simple. It's showing us a raincoat and the idea of the droplets, and it's impactful to anyone who walks past, no matter who you are. Whereas I feel like a lot of what you see is like more is more, but I feel like this is a very less is more example, which creates so much more of an impact. And yeah, it's as Amrita said, it's just one bold design gesture that does the job. It doesn't need to be over designed, doesn't need to be too much. So I love that about this project. Really lovely.
Sergio, why don't we see this approach more often in retail?
I think because in general, retailers want to sell more and more and more, put more stuff on the window. I need to sell that too. I need to sell everything. So it's very difficult to step back and say, no, let's just send one message. But and we are so overwhelmed with messages all day that I think that's exactly the direction we should take, because at least you pause and you see one thing. There is also another aspect that unfortunately we cannot experience from the pictures, but by reading their text presentation, there is also a sensorial experience when you enter, because there is a sound absorbing material behind the perforated metal. So that must be an interesting process when you enter and you walk through it. And it probably stops when the window display stops. So you probably have different echoes or different feelings when you enter the store. I'd love to go there and check it.
Thank you. So congratulations to the team at JA Studio in Spain. Now let's have a look at the interior of the month March. And the winner is, drum roll, the Capsule Hostel and Bookstore in Qinglongwu in the southeast of China, not too far from Hangzhou, designed by Atelier Tao and C. And this is a very atypical combination of a capsule hotel for only 20 people with a communal library. So that means that the architects had to give thought to combining private and public spaces under one roof. Cairo, this project is all about combining old and new. Did the designers do a good job?
Oh my God, yes. I absolutely, again, this, you know, this was like when this came quite early actually in the of the month, and I just remember seeing it, and you know, it just filled me with joy. I think, I mean, like the first image, first of all, is like striking. You couldn't not sort of keep clicking after seeing a photo like that. It's just too intriguing. And then when you hear that this is in a rural town in China, you just, you know, you just want to hear more, really. I think that the way, the sort of really respectful gesture, like the way that they've treated the original facade, is just stunning. Like this very picture, I just think is so beautiful. I mean, it's a really quite small building as well, and they kept the height of it, which is only 7.2 meters. It's actually, you know, only 2 floors, but they managed by cleverly inserting this sort of new structure in, like introducing a building within a building. They have these half slabs, half floors, which is inserted in this library, where people then can sort of crawl up to their little capsule room. And they made sure also that every every room gets their own little window, which fits perfectly into this bamboo structure, or the bookshelf, you know. So the way also, I mean, I think you see it perfectly here, you know, the old walls, how, and the sort of the old building with the original roof as well, where they inserted these sort of new half floors. I think it's just striking. And then they cut these holes for roof lights. These, I think there's another photo where you can see it better from the top, really. But I just think it's just absolutely stunning.
Thanks for your enthusiasm, Caro. Amrita, you were equally enthused. I had a look at your votes, and you scored 39 out of 40 for this project. So 10, 10, 10, 9 across the criteria. Why that enthusiasm?
I think that I'm first an architect, so I think and then an interior designer. But so I have a tendency. I mean, I lean heavy on projects where there's a real congruity between the architectural and the interior design, where they cannot be separated. They cannot. They are entirely codependent and exist in a complete unison. And I think this project does that so perfectly. Firstly, I think conceptually, as an interior for a hotel, this is really quite surprising. I think bookstore, yes, okay. Library, yes, okay. But a hotel, hotels, I think hospitality at its best is an entirely immersive experience. You know, it's fantastical. It shouldn't entirely be just like a replication of your domestic environment. You're going somewhere, you want to feel like you're somewhere else, and you want to experience a hotel with all the theater that it comes with. And I think this project, you know, it feels like you're sleeping in a little nook in the library, basically. It kind of takes that level of theater to you know, quite a unique and an extreme level. And I think that's hard to achieve. It's hard to convince a client to do something like that and to then see it through so successfully and not have it watered down because logistically it was hard to achieve, or, you know, it's hard to convince a client that, okay, a capsule is, you need to have a door on it, you need to have a card locking system, or, you know, all the bits and pieces that come with your typical hospitality challenges. But I think this one really pushes that envelope to what does it mean to design a hotel, a capsule hotel? What does it mean to design within an existing building? How can we create spaces that are unexpected, that are exciting, that are, you know, that completely surprise us and would bring value to the building at its core? Like, how do we turn an existing building into something so unique and give it a whole new chapter, which I think has been done so successfully here. I think that this sort of immersive experience of having the bookshelves, even if they're not lined or even if they're not occupied everywhere, creates this impression of a surface that's going to continually grow and change and can evolve with its uses over time. So, you know, the people who come in may leave a book on a shelf, may displace something, might add new ones. And I think it has this potential to be a constantly evolving tapestry of different content, effectively, as the people who use it will come and go. And I think that its integration into the existing building and the extension of the existing site is so well resolved. You know, here are buildings, you can see here in this picture that this is the point at which the original facade would have been cut, and they've exposed the surface. They've made a point to delineate that cut really beautifully in the connection between the new joinery and the existing, where the existing wall was. You can see whispers of services being hidden and yet expressed, and in a really well detailed way. I think it does everything. It tells the history and creates a future for a building, which is so, I think it's synonymous also with a lot of principles. And I think principles is a hard word to use because everybody has different ones, but a lot of the ideas in which I think that a lot of cultural ideas, which I probably hold valuable, that, you know, history is important, existing structural techniques, the way buildings were built previously, exposing that, finding ways to, you know, share and communicate and carry on history is important. A little bit what Sergio was saying, that, you know, finding value in the past and being able to tell its story in continuity is something that really matters, I think, for our profession. And yeah, I think this does it on so many levels, both materially and sort of socially.
Now I understand your enthusiasm. Thank you. Nassim, would this kind of approach to hospitality also work in a big city? What do you think? I mean, this is very much in a rural, well, part of China, by the looks of these images. No sign of any metropolitan activity. Would it work in a city?
I mean, so much of the joy of this project is that it's surrounded in this landscape. So I wonder that question too. But at the moment, living in a city, I would love to be in a space like this. So I'm going to say yes, in hopes that someone takes it upon themselves to make this exact building in London. But yeah, I definitely think so, just because we all need this level of escapism, this like going to somewhere that just takes you to another place. There's a sense of discovery and wonder and awe in this space. And I think that's an example of a really great hotel where it really transports you to somewhere else. And that could be in the same city that you're living in. It doesn't have to be, but yeah, I mean, it can be, yeah, in the middle of China, but also in London. But I do think that's an example of a great hotel, is if it takes you away to somewhere else. And I feel like that's so much the purpose of what a hotel is, isn't it? It's just to transport you. So yeah, I think it's just tick, tick, tick. It's really done that. And I felt the same as Cairo. Like when I clicked on this project, my breath was taken away. It was just so beautiful, poetic, classic. It feels old, but I mean, of course, with the old structure, but it also feels new. You can't even pinpoint a time because it feels like it's been there forever. Yeah, as you can see, I'm super enthusiastic as well about this project. It's, yeah, awesome.
Thank you, Nassim. Last question for you, Sergio. We've been speaking about the client-designer relationship here. Who do you think has come up with the concept to do a thing like this? The client or the designer?
I think this is probably the client. I think the client probably found the space and they probably felt attached to it. They didn't want to destroy it. So I can see somebody with a vision coming up with a business proposal to create something like this. You need like a visionary, but definitely it could be the client. But then, of course, the relationship between the client and the architect needs to work perfectly. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you don't come up with, you don't get to this level of quality. And there is so much attention to details. I was looking at the floor plans or the pictures. There are a few elements that you almost miss. For instance, at the entrance, there is a sliding door. I don't know if we can go back to the images. There is a sliding door. Then there is a small vestibule that it's made of glass that is aligned with the stone on the bottom. So when you enter the space, then you're inside the space, but not yet because you have a glass in front of you. So there's some sort of filter going from the nature outside into the interior space. So on the left side, that glass at the end of the bookshelf, in the middle of the bookshelf, there is a glass panel. That's the entrance. So on the outside, there is a sliding door. So when you enter the building, you can actually peek inside, but you are still protected by the glass. And that's, I'm sure it's for temperature, wind, and everything. But it's a small detail that gives you a filter when you enter the space. And I think that this attention to detail is what makes this project beautiful. And then there is another one. If we can go to the big facade, the glass facade, exactly. The sides have this corrugated panel. I don't know if it's glass or resin. So you cannot see outside. You see the light, but you don't have a full image of what's happening outside of it. Like here you can see it well on the left and on the right. So these two people cannot peek inside because there is a corrugated glass. And this corrugated glass extends maybe 0.5 meter outside of that, so that once again, when you go up the stairs, the interior is some sort of protected by the people passing by, giving you a sense of privacy that a hotel requires. At the same time, from the inside, it forces the view towards a certain viewpoint. And I don't know if that's a choice or not, but would love to go there and experience all this in person.
Well, you certainly made a study of this project. Thank you for that, Sergio. I missed a couple details here. Well, all of you, thank you so much for explaining why this particular project won last month. You're equally enthusiastic. Congratulations again to Atelier Tau and C and company, I presume that means. Now, are there any overarching trends that have become apparent to you over the last month when looking at 80-something projects from all over the world? Anything that stood out?
I think there's I think that, you know, we've been talking about sustainability for you know, the better part of 2 decades. And I think that that's something that is often discussed, but it's harder to kind of, unless it's mentioned in a text or something, it's harder for us to pick up on entirely. So I think we often tend to, I think there's the sort of sustainability when it comes to materials, or to the way design decisions are made around the functionality or the operational health of a building. And then there's sustainability, which is relevant to the social health of a building and how much people are actually benefiting from being within these spaces. And I think one of the really really great things that we saw in this round of projects, and I mean, I haven't sort of, I'm sure that across all the previous months you've also had a similar trend, is that there's a real awareness and an increase in considering the social sustainability of the buildings that people are designing, or the buildings, the interiors that people are designing. We spend so much of our time inside buildings, you know, from workplaces to homes, and you know, especially if we're living in cities, retail spaces, libraries, museums, and I think more time is actually spent inside buildings rather than looking at them from the outside. And I think it's a huge part of our emotional and physical health as to how well these buildings make us feel. And I think that's something that really stood out in a lot of the submissions, many of them that were extremely successful and across the board, across all of the jury members. I think things that we felt were, where do I see myself wanting to, you know, which projects make me want to use that space? And I think, you know, many of us would agree is that those are the projects that say this is a healthy, sustainable choice or design decision that these people have made, because it's something that we're going to want to occupy, and it's not just about showing us, you know, I think it has become a real measure in how we judge projects, and I think what we've seen, I think, in design too.
How spaces make us feel.
Yeah, I think, how do we feel? Like, I mean, not just how they look, because spaces can be really beautiful, photographs can be really, really, you know, and there are some really beautiful spaces, and it's how do they actually, do you feel like you could be in that space? Like, is that a coffee shop or a restaurant that you want to be sitting in and using? Is that a workplace that you can actually bring your team into and think it's going to work for you as a team? So I think that how something makes you feel, I mean, maybe that sounds kind of like a touchy-feely approach to design, but I think it's a genuine factor in how we judge or perceive the quality of something.
Do you think that will be the end of the era of the Instagram design?
That's a big, hard question. I think that having been a designer before Instagram and now being a designer within the Instagram world, I hope that there's more to how we're going to experience space, especially because we've spent a year inside our homes. I really hope that for us, I'm very hopeful that our return to the city, is going to mean that it's valuable to us to be in a space because it feels good, not just because it looked good on a swipe, you know. I think that's the only thing that's going to bring people back to offices, because it feels good. Because it feels good to have a coffee with someone sitting beside you rather than across the screen, because it feels good to try something on in a shop, because it feels good to touch the thing before you buy it. You know, those are that genuine physical experience is going to matter so much more than the way we consume across screens. So I think we need it.
But I think that Instagram is actually beneficial too, because it increases the quality of the buildings. The fact that people are exposed and they see beautiful buildings, interiors from all over the world, now they want that.
Yeah, I think
so
it raises the
there is
bar.
a danger to it, but there's also, I tend to be positive in that sense. Something good.
Yeah.
Nassim, anything to?
Yeah. Just overlooking all the projects, I felt like there's a boldness that you think with this time and what we're going through, that people would just kind of keep back a bit, but it wasn't the case. All the projects, they were so bold, they were saying something. They might be refined and elegant, but they were still really had a message and were doing things in an interesting, different way. So I think there still is, which makes me very happy, a sense of boldness in what we're doing as designers. So yeah, that was really obvious to me when looking through these, the March series.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nassim. Cairo, last word for you.
Yeah, I just made some quick notes, really, sort of, I guess, just sort of stuff that I noticed along the way. There was, I mean, almost across all the projects, you know, phenomenal photography. And I think I mentioned that previously. I think it could be quite interesting to introduce a category, best sort of architecture photography as well. Because you know, it's some of these spaces are incredibly hard to photograph, you know, and it's like they're dimmed lit, there's, you know, hidden light sources, they're tiny. That's probably why we never saw a photo inside the actual capsule hotel room. But you know, so many of these places are just like, the photographs are just incredible, and obviously that does a lot to the project, but I also think it gives most of them, you know, justice, because it does bring the project to life. And I think that's also a case to argue why Instagram, sorry, the sun is sort of like really, I didn't plan this very well where I'm sitting at the moment, but no, I think that for once, you know, like it was something I really noticed. And I agree with Nassim, like really quite bold projects, a lot of colors, you know, there was quite a lot of sort of submissions for the color category, which I think is really quite fun, and is obviously a trend that's, you know, it's been going on for a while now, but it doesn't seem like it's sort of I think it's here to stay, really, that the interior, you know, interior of the past was sort of quite monochrome and less colorful, so that was quite fun to see. And then I just made some other scribbles, like quite a lot of hotels, a lot of offices, again, a lot of office submissions, which were quite fun for me to look at as well. But yeah, no, I mean, an incredible sort of breadth of projects, really exciting to see.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for sharing your expert opinions. Amrita, Sergio, Cairo, Nassim, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, audience, for watching. There will be a recording available at the end of this week on Frame Web. Of course, we will continue with this kind of jury sessions with another jury. The next one will be in the beginning of May. We will discuss the winners of the month April. And at the end of this year, in October, half October, there will be a big celebration of the interiors of the year. Watch this space, and jury members, we will ask you back for more jury duty at the end of this year. Thanks so much for spending your time at the Frame Awards. Hope to see you back soon. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.